Hello, my name is Heather Slayton. I'm the Assistant State Forester for the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, Division of Forestry. And I would like to talk to you today about exploring carbon markets for state-owned lands and discuss the Tennessee story. But first of all, I wanted to start with discussing why it's important that state agencies explore carbon. Basically, state agencies, as we know, we are the provided unbiased advice source. We provide technical assistance to landowners. We're very trusted, and we can be a trusted source of information in this rapidly developing marketplace that is carbon. But primarily, though, and I'd like to point out that we have the obligation to demonstrate what right looks like, and we own state lands to do just that. And one example that I'll bring up later is that to illustrate that carbon projects are just one tool in the toolbox of managing publicly owned forest. And it actually might not be the appropriate tool in the appropriate forest, and we need to be prepared to demonstrate that as well. But conversely, it can be a tremendous tool to have an extra or additional revenue stream and to be able to teach private landowners what carbon is all about. But landowners are moving forward one way or the other, so we need to make sure that we are right alongside them, if not slightly in front of them, helping them make sound decisions along the way. So the way that Tennessee started on our journey is we partnered with a third party to help guide the conservation agencies through exploring carbon. And when I say conservation agencies in Tennessee, those are the wildlife, the parks and natural areas, and the forestry agencies. So there's three separate agencies. And we decided to come together as this trifecta, as this unified front, because we felt like it was appropriate to show that all state lands can be managed under a carbon project if done correctly. So this third party consultant conducted a two-phase feasibility study for us. In the first phase, they looked at all of our lands and all of our ownership, and they asked us a myriad of questions on our level of harvesting, any kind of permanent protection, conservation easements, other sorts of statutes that we had to adhere to manage. And from that, they were able to determine which projects were viable to carry forward to the second phase. And they presented those projects to us, and we as state agencies prioritized them based on our management needs and the next decade or so of management plans that we had for those for this forest. And then after we prioritized those projects, they went back and put those projects through their models, and they were able to produce a very comprehensive report of the potential for those state lands. Not only in the number of credits possibly produced, but also in the basic cost and the revenue that were associated with those projects. And this is a feasibility study. This had no large scale, in-depth, detailed inventory taken on the ground. This was just utilizing some mega data layers that were already out there. And they were able to give us some very good estimates on where we should start. But I just want to make sure I was clear that this is not a full-blown carbon project. This was just simply a feasibility study that could further demonstrate that we were doing our homework and we were being very thorough in informing our decisions. So from that feasibility study, we were able to drill down all this information that we gathered into three buckets of considerations that we presented to our leadership. And we categorize them as financials, investments, and challenges. So basically financials, what is the bottom line? Investments, what's it going to take to get to that bottom line? And then the challenges is what are we going to face as we move forward to achieving the goals? So I'll dig into each one of these in the next couple of slides. So basically in financials, we explore the improved forest management projects, and we determined that, that they could generate a considerable amount of revenue on our state lands while the states continue to manage actively for those traditional forest values, and whether it be timber, recreation or wildlife. And that's very important to underline, is that we still needed to make sure that we were being good stewards of our state lands with the carbon project overlaid to have the entire project presented. We needed to ensure that we derived a defensible financial return. These are taxpayer dollars here that we're talking about. So we needed to make sure that a defensible return was established. And one of the ways that we did that was we developed a net present value calculation, because the project that we explored was a 40-year project on the voluntary carbon market. So we needed to figure out what our investment was the financial investment today, what is going to elicit in 40 years. And this helped us identify a threshold over which or under which a project would not be a good project for us as a state agency to move forward on. So we identified a threshold that said, okay, if we were not able to meet this financial goal, is it worth the state agencies investing taxpayer dollars into that project? So that's very important for us. The investments. So investments come in different flavors. Carbon projects can be very complex. They can be very time consuming. Obviously, they're multi-year projects. Some can be annual, but for the most part, we were exploring the 40-year voluntary carbon market. And so do we need to add more staff? Did we have the technical expertise on our staff to actually manage this project to its end? Or could we just add additional workload to existing staff? And was there bandwidth there? Was capacity there? Did we feel more comfortable contracting with carbon developers to do this? Would we do our own modeling, or do we partner with carbon developers to do it? Or do we go the service provider route? And the difference between the two, from what I understand, is carbon developers, they can negotiate a rate that's a percentage from the revenue from the carbon sales, versus service providers, which is more of a, hey, we'll charge you for this one service as we go. So there's a couple different models there. Which one's appropriate for the state? Which one's the lowest risk for the state? And how do we ensure that this project will be sustainably managed for the length of the project term, which again, in our case, was 40 years. And in state government, much like anywhere else, there's turnovers, there's retirements, there's shifting of priorities. Every couple of years, we have a whole administration change. So how do we ensure that this project is sustainably managed for many decades? And then finally, do we have a clear and accurate communication plan? Is our strategy working? Is our strategy for communicating to our stakeholders, to our legislature, importantly to the public, is that sustainable? Do they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how this would benefit them? Those are some significant investments that state agencies need to consider. Challenges, and I've already mentioned this a couple of times. Is it appropriate to act on behalf of the state and enroll the state in a commitment of 1 year, 40 years, 100 years? And obviously the answer to this question will be different for other states, but it still is, you are committing the state in your decision. So that was a challenge for us. And I mentioned this earlier too when I'm beginning my slide, but we needed to make sure that we maintain control over appropriate silvicultural prescriptions. And one of the projects that penciled out very high in the feasibility project, because we had a significant amount of carbon that was already being sequestered and we had active forest management there, but we were losing parts of that forest to mortality. So we were needing to accelerate harvesting growth. And when we projected out, when asked the modelers to project out what it meant to harvest 70% growth, 80% growth, 100% growth, 120% growth, we found out that if we accelerated harvesting to catch up with that mortality, then we were going to end up owing money at the end of the term that last 10 or some years of the 40-year contract. So we decided that was not silviculturally appropriate for that forest. And we all know that carbon can be a politically sensitive topic. A lot of folks equate it to climate change, to global warming. I've had numerous people ask me if it's the same thing as Bitcoin, where it's this elusive method of commerce. So it goes back to that communication plan and making sure that the science is there, your reasoning, your homework is done, and you can justify your actions. And so talking a little bit more about the science, this is a topic that's come up just recently. So the question is the current science applicable for forest land under perpetual protection, which perpetual protection in my case, and in our case, is state-owned lands. It's very rare that we divest ourselves of the lands under our management. So the current science methodology derived to come up with carbon credits is derived by determining the difference between business as usual forest management baselines, and the difference between that and how the landowner would behave if the carbon project was absent from that forest. So if the landowner could realistically liquidate their forest resource, because a lot of carbon projects, I mean, that's one of the pillars is incentivizing deferred harvest. They're trying to sequester that carbon, hold it in trees. And so that in the public lands perspective, we are very unlikely, and in some cases, statutorily prevented from liquidating our assets. And we would never consider doing that. So does the science actually, is it applicable for us? And we decided to let the science play out. Again, I mentioned that this market is rapidly changing. The science is developing every day. And so we decided to take a tactical pause on our project to help inform some of the science to better support carbon on perpetually protected lands. And so finally, our recommendations to other state agencies is that we were drinking from a fire hose throughout this whole process. And so we realized as state agencies, we really needed to get up to speed in a hurry. And there's a lot of effort going on out there to make sure that our state agencies, because we are the trusted source of unbiased information to our landowners, so we need to make sure that our staff and our agencies are adequately equipped to provide that unbiased information. And the carbon markets are rapidly changing, but the landowners are making decisions. So again, I started this presentation off saying they're going forward. We just need to make sure we're right there with them, if not slightly ahead of them, just to help guide them. But we definitely need to do our homework. State agencies, we can be statutorily responsible for managing public lands. So we have to make sound, informed decisions, and we have to justify our thought process. We also recommend that the state agencies find those low risk proof of concept projects. Don't go big or go home. Just try to dip your toe into the pool and try it out and to see if carbon is the right fit for your agencies, and it's the right fit for your landowners as well. And document the journey throughout the whole way. That way you can tell landowners, you can develop an outreach program that can be a real life testimonial to landowners to help them make sound forest management and carbon market decisions. But we are obligated to demonstrate what right looks like. So it's very important that we try to get that done at the very beginning of these projects. Well, thank you for your time. I really appreciate your interest in managing state lands under a carbon project. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.